Buddhism. And I'm going to read this morning our non-biblical reading from a book called Stumbling Toward Enlightenment, which is perhaps appropriate for all of us regardless of where we are. It's written by Jerry Larkin, who is an ordained Buddhist Dharma teacher. So she says this: as we stumble toward enlightenment, some part of us becomes hungrier and hungrier for more guidelines. Buddha, of course, was ready for this. His most famous teachings in this regard became known as the Noble Eightfold Path. The first 3 steps have to do with our manifested behavior, how we talk, what we talk about, what we do, how we earn our living. In a perfect world, we would all have complete and compassionate, conscious control over our words and deeds, so we would never harm anyone or anything. But it's not a perfect world, and we make mistakes. And who among us is completely conscious anyway? Not me, that's for certain.
The tongue is a small part of the body, yet it makes great boasts. See how tiny the spark is that sets a huge forest ablaze. The tongue is such a flame. Among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a whole wicked world in itself. All kinds of animals can be tamed by us, but no one can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. We use it to say, "Praise be to our God and Creator," then use it to curse each other. We who are created in the image of God. Blessing and curse come out of the same mouth. This shouldn't be. If there are any wise and learned among you, let them show it by good living, with humility and with wisdom in their actions. But if you have the bitterness of jealousy or self-seeking ambition in your hearts, be careful, or you will find yourself becoming arrogant and covering up the truth with lies. This kind of wisdom doesn't come from above. The wisdom from above, however, has purity as its essence. It works for peace. It's kind and considerate. It's full of compassion and shows itself by doing good.
Would you pray with me? Holy One, as we continue this spiritual journey week by week, continue to help us to focus, to seek our inner wisdom, to seek a deeper path and a deeper relationship with spirit and light and love. And may the words of my mouth and Jerry's this morning and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So 2 weeks ago, we began this journey talking about the 4 Noble Truths of Buddhism. There are probably some folks who are wondering why we're talking about Buddhism when we're a Christian community, but I firmly believe that all of the major truths in all of the world religions are found equally in every one of them. And sometimes if we look at them from a slightly different angle, from a path that someone else has taken, maybe we gain a little bit of insight into our own. But you can see the correlation even as we read some Buddhist thought and we read some Christian scripture. There's correlation. The same concepts are in both. Sometimes it takes seeing it from a different angle to have it sink in a deeper way. So, as always, take what you can and leave what doesn't work for you. Jerry started our conversation on Buddhism 2 weeks ago with the first noble truth, which is essentially that suffering is inevitable, which should not have been a great shock to anybody. But it's a conscious awakening to recognize that everyone deals with that. And he provided some wonderful examples from his life and some wonderful wisdom for each of us in starting to use that as sort of a foundational way to look at the world and recognize that everybody suffers. And perhaps we will increase in compassion and gratitude, as Jerry did in recognizing that. So the second noble truth I talked about last week, which is that suffering is caused by attachment and craving and desire and wanting, all of those things that we want, and then when we don't get them, we're disappointed and we suffer. It's an emotional, mental suffering. And so we talked about human beings' Velcro nature and how we like to, get Velcro to something and not let go, and the pain that causes us because we won't let go. Part of that noble truth says that suffering is caused by attachment, but it's rooted in ignorance. And the ignorance is sometimes our own willful forgetting or ignoring or not wanting to think about the reality that life is impermanent, that change happens, and that none of us are going to live forever. And so the ignorance is when we forget some of those pieces. And so we talked about letting go. So I'm going to test your memory. I know most of you were here. So the phrase we did was, letting go is not only the goal, good for you, but it's also the path. Letting go is not only the goal, because if it were just the goal, we'd be failing all the time, right? We have to work on letting go. Letting go is part of the path every single day. So the third noble truth says that suffering can be overcome, that we can move beyond it, which leads right into the fourth noble truth, which says that the way we do this is at least in part laid out by the Eightfold Path that the Buddha set forth. As Jerry Larkin said, we start to crave guidelines. Tell me how to do this. Show me the ways so that I can reduce the suffering in my life, because that would be really good, right? So the Eightfold Path includes right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right awareness, right concentration, right thought, and right understanding. So this week and next week, we're going to touch on a number of those, although not all of those, and then we'll move on to something else. But today I want to talk about the first three, which are right speech, right action, and right livelihood. They're sort of our moral compass in walking through the days of our lives. So to me, when I say right speech and right action, all of you should kind of go, oh yeah, I kind of know what that means. So we're going to see how you do on that. What does right speech look like? Or is it easier for me to say what doesn't right speech look like? Oh, come on, I know you're all intelligent, a lot of you have a lot of degrees. Okay, so gossip is not right speech.
Right speech is affirming.
It is affirming. It is positive, uplifting. Good. What else?
Not hateful.
Not hateful.
Truthful.
Truthful.
Not hurtful.
Honest. Not hurtful.
Positive.
Positive.
Building,
I'm sorry?
building or uplifting?
Building, sure, lifts people up, builds you up.
Constructive.
Constructive.
Appreciative.
Appreciative.
Loving.
Loving. Kind. Compassionate. Not mean, not bullying. Okay, good. So you get to the basic sense there. How about right action? To have integrity. Sharon?
Pretty much the same terms as the speech. You know, that.
So your action should be compassionate, it should be kind, it should be loving.
Accepting.
Accepting. We could probably throw some knots in from the Ten Commandments, right? We probably shouldn't steal, and shouldn't kill, and shouldn't, probably the most basic bottom line of right action is to not harm yourself or others. So So we take all of those things that we just named, and they should, if we're following this Buddhist path, it should inform the way we live. So right livelihood might be our, whatever work, quote unquote, we do in our lives. Whether it's volunteer work or work in our homes or it's career work, that our livelihood should follow right speech and right action. If you are asked to lie in your job, it's going to cause conflict in your spiritual life because it's not in line with the Eightfold Path. And perhaps you should rethink that job. Okay? So that's about all I'm going to say about right livelihood, because the other two pieces are more important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about right action, and then Jerry's going to pick up with right speech. When it comes to these two pieces, it was pretty clear in the scripture that Brian read this morning that the author of James was on the same wavelength here. And he pretty much was pretty harsh about what our tongues can cause. Our tongues are like a little flame that can spark an entire forest fire. And they can cause all kinds of evil in the world. Yeah, the author says we seem to have a really hard time controlling what our tongues do. Taming our tongues. And I think that's probably very true. And he goes on to say that the wise person, if any among you are wise, then for Pete's sake, if you would just live that way, that would be great. Live wisely, show each other what that looks like. In Buddhism, the lotus flower is a symbol, a very important symbol that you will see all over the place in Buddhism. You all know, right, that a lotus grows in a pond. Have you ever walked barefoot in the bottom of a pond? It's like really kind of gross, right? It's mucky and slimy, and you sink in, and it's in between your toes, and it's squishy, and it's really good. So the metaphor is that the lotus roots itself in that mucky, gross bottom of the pond, which is sort of like life. But it grows up and up and up on a long stem, and it sort of looks like it's floating right above the water, resting right on the water, above the muddy waters, the murky waters, above all that mucky, icky stuff that it's rooted in. And so the metaphor becomes that we have to operate and live in the messiness of this world. The spiritual life is about rising above all of that and being able to live with clarity and a purity or sacredness of mind and of heart. So they hold this up as a symbol to remind ourselves that while we've got to operate in this yucky stuff, we have the ability to live and to speak and to act from a place of clarity and sacredness. So how do you do this? Because it ain't easy. In the other reading I read for you this morning, Jerry Larkin says, well, in a perfect world, we would all have compassionate clarity of consciousness. And of course, as we move through the world, then we would move constantly, consistently with right speech and right action. She says, but it's not a perfect world, and how many of us are conscious all the time? And so again, how do we do this? Well, I read something by Jack Kornfield that made a lot of sense to me. He said that one of the most important things we could do is to pay attention to our motivation and our intention as we go through our days. That the seed of our intention will create our future. So we ask ourselves in any given situation, what's my motivation? If I am angry or jealous or spiteful or vengeful or depressed or feeling worthless, if I'm going into a conversation or a situation with those sorts of negative feelings within, then my intention to have probably a nice conversation is not going to happen. I am coming from a negatively motivated place, and the outcome of whatever I'm going to do has a really good likelihood of being negative. But if my motivation is from a place of kindness and compassion with an intent to heal and an intent to move forward and an intent to create a safe place or a common ground or a loving connection, then the chances of a positive outcome are more likely. Does that make sense? And so it's important as we go into whatever situation we're going to go into in our lives, even if it's just a conversation with the people you live with, to come from a place that's motivated by positive things, if you want a positive outcome. I learned really, really early on in my life that if you want to hurt somebody else, you will. If it is your intent to cause pain through your words or your actions, it will work. So perhaps if we had an intention to create good, we are more apt to also have that happen. The Dalai Lama said that no matter if he makes a mistake, he at least knows that he had the right motivation. So Jack Kornfield went on to share a story about when he was getting married. He'd been dating a woman named Leanne, and they had a really tumultuous courtship. They were complete opposites, temperamental opposites, and they both came from families that carried a lot of baggage and pain. And so it took them quite a long time to work through all of those problems in their relationship. But they finally got to a point where they decided they would marry. Jack was still a little bit concerned about his ability to do it, basically. He thought, at 30 years old, how do you make a commitment till death do us part? And so he sought out the wisdom of his favorite older couple, David and Mary, who happened to be Quaker. They'd been married a long time, and the basis, the foundation of their relationship was mutual respect. And so he went to visit him and he said, okay, I'm not sure I get this. How do you make a commitment to one other person in a marriage vow to be with them for the rest of your life? And David looked at him and said, you don't. And Mary clarified and said, you renew that commitment, that vow, every day. It's the same thing with motivations and intentions. I can't today say, I plan to live the rest of my life from a place of compassion and kindness and generosity and love. I have to set that intention every day, if not multiple times a day, to steer myself back on course. To set that intention every day. So the same book that I read out of for you this morning, Jerry Larkin talks about how on her refrigerator door, she has posted some basic Buddhist precepts that she reads every morning. I vow to cultivate compassion and to find ways to protect the lives of others. I vow to cultivate loving kindness and to seek the well-being of others. I vow to practice generosity. I vow to cultivate right speech and listening well. And so every morning, she said, she stands there with her bagel and she reads these precepts, thinking that perhaps one day they will actually sink in. But it's basically setting her intention for the day. And so one day, she pulled into a gas station, she said into a redneck Midwestern town, which she said she knew was redneck because she lived there, and a few years prior, she had had an encounter with the inordinately high number of Ku Klux Klan in the area. So she pulled in, she got out of her car, and she started to fill it up with gas. And suddenly, there were 8 pickup trucks parked around her. And as she looked around, she noticed that in the corner of the gas station parking lot was a young, very large black man making a call at the phone booth. So we can guess what year this was because they were actually payphones. She said he was a young man. He was probably, over 6 feet tall, over 200 pounds. But everybody in these pickup trucks was watching this young man. She said, like cats. Like the kind of watching when you know somebody's watching your back, even though you can't see them, and like the not good kind of watching. And she said, the first thing that popped into her mind was, may I be kind and generous. She thought, wow. Okay, so she walked across the parking lot, and she approached the young black man. She said hi, she just very casually, so just wondering if you need a ride somewhere. It turns out his truck had broken down on the highway, and yeah, he could use a ride home, which was 35 miles away. But she gave him a ride home. She said, maybe I saved his life, maybe I was just being paranoid. But having read those precepts, having set her intention for the day, helped her to be aware of what was going on, and helped her to have the courage to do the right thing in that time and that space. Jerry, I'm going to hand this over.
You're actually going to have to hold it. If you want to use it, you're going to have to.
You're asking a lot there, Kaye. What I plan to do is to give you a report on how I practiced right speech. I'm going to talk about the difficulties involved, the raw endurance it took, and eventually some rewards.
And each from your own.
What?
There.
There you go. All right. I want to tell you that I have hurt people with words that have come from my mouth. A few years before my mother-in-law died, she told me a story about how Diane and I were visiting them around Christmas time. And I was on the telephone talking to my brother, asking him to come and visit us at that house. And I called their house that little cracker box. I called their house a little cracker box. What makes this terrible, really, is that my mother-in-law was one of these 50s housewives who took the greatest pride in her house. And she lived to clean that house and make it better and that kind of thing. And I demeaned her residence with that brief thing I said. And what's more pathetic is that I didn't remember I said it. I don't remember saying that. It just came out. I have hurt people with things I've said. People have hurt me. It's not like anybody burned the house down. Nobody slashed the tires. Nobody put lye in the lawn. No, it's stuff they said. Stuff they said is what stuck with me. I would say there's about 5 people in my life that when they're in the same room with me, I make sure to go to the other side of the room. I don't want to hear what they say. I don't want to be anywhere near it. Because I don't trust what they're going to say, because they have a history of saying things that are intended to damage and disrespect. Many times these things are jokes filled with sarcasm. I have a friend that I meet every Monday morning for a little breakfast. And we talk to each other, and we're friends, we're good friends. But there are certain things that I can't talk about, and one of them is religion. He's a fundamentalist, so he knows the truth. And I belong to this congregation. So I don't dare bring up this congregation, because if I do, a little cloud forms in his eyebrows, and he comes up with a sarcastic joke. Oh, it could be about liberals, it could be about little lost sheep, or whatever, you know. You know what I'm talking about. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, he got in a fracas with another artist. And this artist accused him of being disrespectful. The next Monday morning, my friend looks at me and says, when you think of me, do you think of someone who's disrespectful? And so I explained to him, well, I've seen that side of you. And I explained what that looked like, right there at that table. And another cloud formed around his eyebrows. And he says, well, that's just my humor. In 2004, I rented a large space in the Racine Business Center for a studio. I thought I was going to be living in heaven. But that wasn't the case. There were 20 other artists in the area, and one of them began to badmouth. In fact, spread lies about it, or conjectures. How about that? Conjectures. There was nothing I could do about it. But it created kind of a bad atmosphere in the place. Also, more and more artists signed on. There are now like over 60 artists in that area. Artists often wish to have other artists look at their works. There would be a critique. So we'd have a critique, a little group critique, and then son of a gun, there were little post-critiques among little groups. How could they talk about my art? In 2012, I heard a very inspirational CD about the practice of right speech. And I said to myself, I need to do that. I was so convinced I needed to do that I actually did it. Here are the parameters for right speech. Your speech should be truthful. No lies, no conjectures. Your speech should be passionate, compassionate, gentle, edifying. And here's the kicker. You ask yourself, why do I want to say this before you say it? If you want to blow a fuse in your mind, just try that for a while. No gossip, no half-truths. I want to tell you, I didn't become a saint. I'm still not a saint. But there was something about not being so critical and not being so harsh in my speech that just made me feel better. At first, so now I'm practicing right speech. Now we're having a little communal get-together. So now everybody's talking. And you know what? I don't have much to say. So I'm just sitting there. And this conversation is going on around me. And I almost want to say, hey, I'm not a ghost. I'm right here. Don't you want to know what I have to say? No, they didn't know. They didn't know what I wanted to say. So I was in the position of just having to listen. I just listened. Now, I always thought that I was a good listener. And it's true. Actually, I could be a good listener when I wanted to be. But now, see, good listening is part of the job of just being awake. Well, amazingly enough, about 7 to 9 months into this, I started feeling better. I felt better again because these words were just not coming out of my mouth. Just having the words come out of my mouth, see, sort of poisoned the atmosphere. Just not having the words come out of my mouth made it a better world for everybody around me. This pertains, there's a Christian principle involved here. Be not judgmental. I became less judgmental. That was a huge barrier for me. This whole idea of being judgmental was something I carried around with me from the time I was a freshman in college, I think. I just sort of judged everything that was going on around me. Well, I kind of softened up a little bit. You know, kind of softened up. Yeah, you made a mistake. Hey, you didn't believe the mistakes I made. That kind of thing. Also, I got rid of knee-jerk reactions. Another burden lifted. If somebody, like at an art reception or something like that, came up and, gave me one of those cream pies, one of those word cream pies right in the face, I just took it. I was silent. I didn't say anything. I just let the comment drift away. There was nothing to say. To respond to it, to bite the hook, so to speak, is just to make matters worse. It's to create more dukkha out there in the world. And you know what? Finally, just recently, I've begun to understand that those people throwing those pies aren't that happy. In fact, they're probably unhappy, as manifested by the stuff that's coming out of their mouth. This practice of right speech is difficult because there's always some new situation to deal with. There is, for instance, the man in the studio area that talks too much. And because I have a tendency to listen now, he wants to talk to me because I listen. Is he wasting my time? Well, I don't know. Depends how you look at it. I've got a stance for this guy. He doesn't show up every day. When he does show up, I'm giving him 10 minutes. I'm going to listen like heck for 10 minutes. I'm going to let that speech of his wander around, wherever it goes. 10 minutes. Take a look at the watch. Take a look at the watch. And then, when that's about over, then I say, hey, you know what? I've got the schedule of things I want to do. See you later. And I believe there's kind of a Christian thing going on there with do unto others as you would have them do unto you.